Good evening, Facebook. We are live at another meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton, and I am your host, Keisha Hamilton. I am a little late getting on tonight. I had a couple of technical difficulties, but we are here and we are excited to get started and right into the conversation. Let's see, I feel like okay, a little bit there. Messed up my stuff. Anyways, welcome back, everybody. We are back for another meeting of Diverse Minds, and we are talking Juneteenth tonight because, of course, it's coming up very soon. And regardless to all the information that is available out there, we still need to talk about it. And especially when we consider the different responses that are given by our different organizations and businesses and other places, it's clear that we need to continue having these conversations. So we're going to get right into it. Of course, we always like to define diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, I'm always checking to make sure that I am not muted. I have done that before, where I have been muted before. Let me just make sure that I can hear my volume. I cannot yet. Let me just make sure that I am hearing myself. Okay. All right. So, like I said, we're back for another meeting of Diverse Minds. We're going to get right into our definitions. We always like to define diversity, equity, and inclusion because just like Juneteenth and the what it is and why it exists, you know, there's a multitude of information out there, and yet we still find ourselves in a space where we, you know, really just don't understand it. Same thing when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. These terms are consistently being, said and heard in different spaces. It's so interesting how everyone changed from saying different to diverse. So it's like, you know, I want diverse ice cream, you know, or I don't know if anybody has ever said I want different ice cream. I think they have. So yeah, so we changed the words to, you know, diverse. It's just really interesting how terminology changes in order to try to keep up with and to appear as if we are. Anyways, so because of that, we're going to define these terms every time we come on here, or for the most part. So what is diversity? Diversity is difference. So when a person's saying I want diverse ice cream, they're actually, you know, speaking about different kind of ice creams that they may want to have, something other than what everybody else may be having. So for me, you know, I'm a woman who likes vanilla ice cream all the time. Most people that I engage with and that I'm around, they like chocolate ice cream. Me, I like, you know, vanilla ice cream. So that would be a difference from the chocolate ice cream, you know what I mean? So yes, diversity is simply our differences. I don't know where I came with the ice cream example tonight. Maybe I want some, I don't know. But anyways, though, here on a meeting of diverse minds, we acknowledge and recognize that there are all kind of diversity that we are existing in. I've heard it in different places. I think Mondays with Maisha, she also talks about anti-racism on her show. You should watch her sometimes. But she talks about difference. I think she said this before numerous times that, you know, difference simply is, you know, I mean, you walk into a space and you're going to have diversity. There's always going to be someone who's not like you. Even identical twins, you know, there's something different about these people when they walk into a room. Even if they're the only two people in the room, you know, there's always some type of difference present. But the diversity that we like to acknowledge and pay attention to and focus on a meeting of diverse minds with Keisha Hamilton is our diversity of thought. Okay, we acknowledge and have to, you know, recognize that when we don't think differently than the groups that we're around, when we don't intentionally put ourselves in spaces to understand difference other than who we are, a lot of times we settle into groupthink. A lot of times we, you know, we just don't have any creativity. You know what I mean? As much as we might think that we're creating something within this space that we're in, we're really just, you know, just spinning our wheels and creating different versions of the same thing. Versus if you have actual diversity of thought, you know, now you're not only creating different versions of it, you're creating actually something different as well. So anyway, so diversity is simply our differences. Yes, it relates to our skin tones, it relates to our height, it relates to who we love, it relates to the gender, our genders, it relates to the different religions that we may, you know, choose to engage in. But the one that we like to acknowledge here on a Meeting of Diverse Minds, because it's so impactful, is our diversity of thought. Do we have it? How do we get it? And what does that even mean? And we've talked about that before. Whether or not you have it if you're willing to, if you've expanded your mind and you're willing and able to see different thought processes and different ideologies, and you're accepting of those things, even if you recognize it. While I may or may not practice these behaviors based on that ideology, I can accept the fact that that's normal and that's okay under that ideology, and I can even support it. That's when you're different in your ideology. That's one way that you'll know. What is equity and inclusion? We're going to talk about equity. Equity is an acknowledgement and an awareness of barriers and a willingness to eliminate those barriers. Equity, again, is also being able, and I'm not going to say able, because most of us are able and we just choose not to, but I guess we'll say able, but being willing also to eliminate those barriers. So, we get so many of these buzzwords, once they come around. Our dominant culture is so quick to, grab these buzzwords and start throwing them all out there like they, wanting to appear as if they are practicing these things, right? So equity is acknowledging that barriers exist. So you have to, one, have some diversity of thought. You have to be willing to see that just because you have a hardship and another person has a hardship, it doesn't mean that their hardship shouldn't be examined more directly. And we get this in when it comes to, especially when it comes to working, America is so quick to tell a group of people, specifically Black people and brown people, but specifically Black people, that you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Why don't you have a job? There are tons of jobs out here. You just need to stop being lazy, get out there and get a job, and you won't have any. Then you'll be able to take care of your families, and stop having kids. Just all these ideas that dominant culture likes to put out there. When, if we were operating through equity, we will recognize that, one, we're asking individuals to go into spaces that dominant culture permeates and that are unsafe for Black, specifically, individuals, and then of course our brown brothers and sisters as well, and our indigenous brothers and sisters especially. So we're asking them to go into these spaces that are unsafe for them, one. Two, we're asking them to go into spaces that will not be equitable to their needs, right? So go and get a job. Okay, so I'm going to get a job in this place that's paying me $12 an hour. I can't survive on $12 an hour. And equity can go so far, because equity is the key to everything. It's the thread that pulls everything together. If you don't have equity, you don't have anything. All this belonging and this and if you don't have equity, you have nothing. Okay, you have to be able to acknowledge that there are specific barriers in place that our system has designed, that we operate through, that are keeping individuals and specific groups back and separated from the different things that they need, right? So if we don't acknowledge, for example, statistically speaking, that we can prove with data that Black women specifically are paid, I think, 60 cents less on the dollar than the white man. If we don't acknowledge that our system is set up that way, that we offer pay, to Black women specifically, that is so much less than the white man, if we don't acknowledge that exists and then fix that, okay? So it's one thing to acknowledge it. Equity is not simply acknowledging it. Equity is saying, I'm giving you what you need. Equity is saying, I recognize that you're not getting paid the amount of money that you should be, and I'm going to fix that. I'm going to pay you the amount of money that you need to have. We're talking reparations, okay? Because that's what equity is. When we talk about fixing that by paying the correct amount to these women, then we have to acknowledge that we've been paying you this amount and less for, I don't know, 200, 300, 400 years, 200, 300, 400 years. Equity is giving a person what they need to succeed, which means that you got to make some of that up, because you still can't take me to a job and say, okay, I'm going to give you, the median, let's say the rate of pay for everybody is $15 an hour. I'm going to fix this equity situation with our Black women specifically, and we're going to give you $15 an hour. Well, what's $15 an hour gonna do for a woman who and a group of people? So we're talking Black. I'm just giving you an example of Black women right this second. But what is that gonna do for a group of people who's been paid, $9 in comparison to the $15 an hour for so many years? Let's just say 20 years, okay? 20 years, white guys getting $15 an hour and consistent raises. And for 20 years, the Black woman's getting $9 an hour without consistent raises, because that's generally how things occur. What does that look like in their living conditions? What does that look like in their health? What does that look like in their ability to build wealth? What does all that, how does that play out? Now, we talk about equality being the goal because it actually is the goal. We want to get to a state where all of us are existing in a state of equality, where we all have our needs met, where we all, can be appreciative of the quality of life that we have, where we're all feeling safe in the world that we live in. We want that state of equality. Everybody should feel safe, right? How do we get individuals who have had a existence of inequity to a state of equality by giving them simply what they need right this second? And this is the thing, because are we really considering all their needs in this second, right? How do we fix all these things? Safety, we can talk about safety. How do we fix safety for this group of people? What do we do right now, and that also can reach into the future, and that can reach into the past to fix some things and create. So equity is not simply just saying I'll give you give you the same amount of pay. We don't need equality. We don't need you to say, I'm gonna make you equal, and that means that we're now equitable. That's not the case, okay? You do not you don't reach equality simply by, you don't reach equity simply by giving me the same amount as someone else who you've intentionally made a disparity between us before. So for example, you got your white men and Black women. You've intentionally had this disparity that statistically and you can prove with data that white men get paid more on the hour than Black women. You can't say, okay, you know what, we're just gonna pay you all the same amount now. Well, hold on, you got some stuff to fix there. There were some barriers that are in place. Thank you for removing them by giving us the same amount. Thank you for being aware of them. But what about all the stuff all the ways that, me not having that money for all this time, how it also destroyed other areas of my life? How are we fixing all those things? So equity is, again, recognizing those barriers, being aware of them, and being willing to address them and to fix them. And equity is not fair. So many people think that, we just gonna give you the same amount. That's what you need. No, that's not actually what I need. Actually, I need about probably 10 times more than him. That's probably what I actually need to reach equity. Okay. So anyways, that's equity. We've talked about it numerous times. You all can, go watch some more of my videos, and we'll come back on here again and have more conversations on it. But what is inclusion? So inclusion is having a seat at the table, specifically those tables that are related to policy and decision making. So that's inclusion. For example, I've given the example before that inclusion is like, it's similar to a little girl having a tea party with her teddy bears. And so visualize with me here, you have a little girl with her, table and, her chairs, her teapot, or, fake cookies, likely, maybe some real cookies, maybe some, real tea, maybe. And oftentimes her teddy bears are her guests at the table, right? And so she's asking her teddy bears questions, and they're having, one-sided conversations or conversations where she's, kind of speaking in the, in a tone that's different for each teddy bear, so that there could appear to be some conversation going on, and whatever decisions or projects or ideas are being shared at this table really are coming from one ideology, one person, right? The individuals who are around the table, these teddy bears, are not really contributing. They're just there as props. Oftentimes, that's what our inclusion efforts actually look like. We have, white dominant culture, which is, we understand, white people, to be our dominant culture. And, we've done our history. We've talked about it before, how America was created, the America that we know today, how it was created, who did that. I mean, we recognize that those are white people. Okay, so just, we've already established. But, we have our white people, oftentimes they will bring around the table, these props. So they'll bring their Black and brown employees who have made it to some level of recognition, because not notoriety, not influence. Generally it's just, you know, you've demonstrated, Black and brown individuals, you demonstrated to me, your white employer, that you will go with the flow. So, you know, now we're going to give you some more responsibility or aware or recognition by putting you at this table. And generally speaking, what happens at the table that we're talking about, an inclusive table, generally these Black and brown individuals are just simply props. They're just sitting there, you know, contributing nothing different, because they're not there to contribute anything different. They are not allowed to contribute anything different. And so you don't get true inclusion, right? True inclusion, actual inclusion, is recognizing, and one other thing I'll give you before we talk about inclusion, you know, the true inclusion. There was a meme, a picture floating around, and we've talked about this before as well, during President Obama's presidency. And it just happened to be floating around during his presidency, so we just, you know, mentioned that. But there was a group of white men who were around like a big, you know, wood oval table, sitting there, and they were making decisions on women's issues. So they were making some laws or something on women issues. And the irony of this image, this photo that was floating around, was that there were a group of all white men, you know, which, you know, is significant to the fact that oftentimes our boardrooms do look like this: all white men or all white women, or all white men and women. But this was a group of all white men who were, again, making decisions on women's issues. There's no inclusion there. There's no one at the table who represented the issue that was being addressed. And that's like the heart of, that's not inclusion, okay? So true inclusion would be ensuring that anyone who is impacted or affected by whatever is being discussed, you know, that their voices are at the table. So I talked about before on one of my conversations that, you know, say we're crafting legislation or policy around how much time parents should take off, you know, and we have only parents in the room who have small children, you know, and we say you all should be representative enough of you know, of the whole group. Or, and let's say these parents also had, you know, no more than 3 children each, you know what I mean? And so these are the individuals who are at the table. They all have small children, and no more than 3 children each. Well, where's the representation? Who's representing the larger families? Who's representing a parent with 6 kids? Who's representing single parents? Who's representing 2-parent homes? Who's representing individuals who have older parents that they take care of? If we're going to craft legislation that is around, you know, let's say PTO and, you know, and time off based on, you know, the needs of a family, how are we doing that with a niche group of people? How are we doing that with a small group of people that's not representative of all the people that are going to be impacted by this legislation, policy, practice? How are we doing it? You're not doing that. You're not being inclusive. They're doing it every day. That's occurring every single day. You know, policy is being crafted and created that impacts individuals who are not at the table to have a say in what that policy or you know, practice, what it should look like, right? So true inclusion is having all those that are impacted at the table, and including what's being said. That's the other part. You know, oftentimes we say, okay, you're here at the table, we've got everybody represented. And so this person saying, this is what I need, that person saying, this is what I need. And the only people that we're listening to is a small group of people, even though other people's voices are there, but we're saying what you have to say, we're not going to incorporate into what we're creating. We're going to just go with this middle ground. You know, we're going to go with the middle. You know, we're not going to have any special sections of this policy or this practice based on these special needs, because it's easier for us just to go with the middle ground. Well, you're still not including everybody. You still got people who are going to violate whatever you create based on the fact that you didn't include them. So inclusion, again, it's, you know, not only having a seat at the table, it's being not only invited to the table, it's being an active contributor to whatever is being created at the table. Okay, and that takes work. That's collaboration. That's not coercion. Most of our, you know, boardroom conversations are, you know, held and had among peers that are friends and that all live in the same and think the same, and you know, it's not an inclusive and diverse group. But then also, you know, it's mostly just, you know, what do you think? Okay, yeah, I think the same thing, let's do that. There's no collaboration, there's no diversity of thought, there's no, you know, difference of opinion. There's just, you know, let's just all get out of here quick as we can. Okay. You can't get to inclusion in that way. All right, so let's go on. What is racism? So racism is, you know, so we have our definition. It's the marginalization or the oppression of people of color based on socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people. Basically, racism is, you know, an engineered concept, a socially engineered concept that, again, based on skin tone, that is codified. It's systematic. It's written into laws. And so that's the other part of it. It has a power piece to it, right? So, you know, sometimes I think it's a good way to explain it by defining what it's not. So it's not just prejudice. If it could be considered prejudice, it would be considered racial prejudice. But prejudice is, you know, where I simply, as a person, you know, for example, you know, say I'm Keisha, who I am, training specialist for where I work, and I tell everybody on my Facebook page of, you know, few followers that, hey, look, you know, chocolate ice cream is really nasty. You all should not eat it. I might influence 2 people who like ice cream. Actually, I'll probably influence no people, but let's just say, you know, I might influence 2 people who like ice cream who like chocolate ice cream to choose not to buy it, right? Say I'm the president of the United States and I say to the country, you know, I've determined, you know, after much research, me and my staff, that chocolate ice cream is bad for the nation, that, you know, it has all these properties in it that do da 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 da. So I'm saying we should not eat it. Imagine what happens to stocks and bonds and sales and et cetera of chocolate ice cream at that point. I'm in this position of authority that allows me to impact large groups of people, and that large groups of people are listening to and will rely on and will operate through the information I'm giving them, right? So now chocolate sales go down, you know, ice cream companies can't make any money off of it, or, you know, the stocks go down, and those who have invested in it lose money, you know, because somebody of influence said not to do it. Same thing when it comes to racism, okay? Racism is, it's crafted into our legislation, it's crafted into our policy, it's crafted into our practices, and it was crafted for so long. And I can't wait till we talk about Juneteenth later on, because I got some stuff that I have to say about that. But it's been crafted into and instituted in what we've had for so long that, you know, we have laws against, you know, boys whose pants are sagging. Now we know lots and lots of people's boys, you know, lots of boys' pants sag. And, you know, I'm not here to judge yes or no, or, you know, that's not the issue at this time. But to create a law against an individual's pants sagging when one group of people may do that more often than any other group of people, again, no judgment in either way, you know, on that, but to create a law against that, you know, that now I can call my troops out to criminalize you with, you know, because I created this law that criminalizes you, now I can call my troops, the cops, and say, okay, go and arrest him, give him a ticket, et cetera, simply because you do something that I don't like, which is maybe more a part of your culture than a part of other cultures. Now I'm like the president when it comes to that chocolate ice cream. And that was a bad example, just so you know, as far as that, because, you know, I don't know that sagging is part of any one culture per se, but hopefully you got the lesson in that. Racism is this prejudice against skin tone coupled with power. Okay, it's coupled with power. It's systemic in nature. It's written into our laws, so much so that it feels normal and right versus criminal, like it ought to be. Okay, and it impacts whole groups of people specifically, and not others. You know, point that I could share easily would be when we're talking about Black and brown men and women, who, specifically men though, who are killed oftentimes by the police. Police forever are terrified of the backs of Black and brown people when they're running away from them. They have to kill them for some reason. You know, for some reason, they're scared of Black and brown individuals who are unarmed. You know, they're forever afraid of them. Why? Why are you afraid of them and not white individuals who are doing the exact same thing often? How does that, what is it about Black and brown individuals that are unarmed versus white individuals who are armed that doesn't give you the same type of fear? What is it? What's the difference aside from their skin tone? Because racism, you know, systemically says that this is a dangerous person because we've decided in our society based on how based on slavery, how slavery was, you know, the emancipation, and then based on mass incarceration and our criminalizing every behavior that Black and brown individuals did because we wanted them to be re-enslaved. Now we think everything they do still, because that mindset still permeates white culture and our dominant culture. Now everything Black and brown individuals do is terrifying and needs to be killed, okay? So this is racism. It's the, like I said, it's the racial prejudice coupled with power. And the power is in our systemic, you know, it's systemic in our legislation. It's in our ability to say, you know what, I don't like your behavior. I don't like your look. Therefore, you're getting fired. Therefore, I'm calling, you know, my supervisor. I don't like your tone. We criminalize. And then when you call all these people to address these things that you don't like, they all see the exact same thing and in the exact same way and criminalize it just like you, because again, their awareness, their consciousness of who and why they think the way they do, it hasn't, you know, I'm not even gonna say that it hasn't been opened, because oftentimes dominant culture knows exactly what they're doing. They just choose not to operate through that knowledge. They just, because they're not being impacted, it's easy to, you know, let somebody else get fired, you know, be oppressed on their job or lose their lives, you know. So anyways, that is racism. What is anti-racism? Anti-racism is one, being aware that that exists. That's not all the anti-racism is. Anti-racism is an action word, okay? Anti-racism is not only being aware of racism and how it operates and how it is systemic throughout our systems, but then it's also intentionally fighting against it. It means speaking up. It means voting in a way that doesn't add to racist actions and policies. It means doing everything in your power to educate yourself, to not practice it, but then also to, you know, to ensure that it's not happening anymore, right? And now we know, you know, it's an actual system. So this thing is huge, right? It's a huge system of this thing. And so no one person alone can eliminate all of it everywhere. But we do have a responsibility, each of us individually, to do our part to address racism by being anti-racist, by recognizing it, by you know, recognizing that we have an action that we need to be doing every day, even if it's just simply educating ourselves. But then also when we go to the polls, making sure that we are ensuring that Black and brown voices are uplifted, and that policies that are being created and individuals who support those policies that are being created that are not helpful and that add to races, that we are not getting those types of people in office. Those are our responsibilities, okay? So that's anti-racist. Anti-racist is not simply just being aware, okay? We have folks who, like I said, most of the time, you know, our dominant culture is fully aware. You know, they may have some, you know, confusion about some stuff, but for the most part, the basics that they do have, and they just choose, you know, not to address those things. Okay, so what is Juneteenth? We are talking Juneteenth because it is coming up. Feel free, good evening, those of you who are watching that I see on there. Hi. Feel free to add your thoughts, you know, on any of this really, but also I'm thinking of Juneteenth. I have a little something I'm gonna read, and then we'll talk about it as far as Juneteenth. So what is Juneteenth? We know it's coming up on June 19th. I know different individuals and groups will be celebrating on different days based on, you know, the holiday. So I think a lot of things are going to be going on the 18th. And you know, these next few weekends will be celebrations of Juneteenth, but Juneteenth is actually June 19th. That's the actual day. It is the oldest nationally commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. And I went to Juneteenth.com to give you a little bit of this information. It's very important to me. And on my own website, diversemindsconsulting.com, I have a resource page there, and every resource that I put on there, I try to make sure that it is a resource that is from Black and brown individuals, because I am a firm believer and acknowledger that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but oftentimes furthest from resources and power. And you know, you all know I love my JOUSA, is where I got that from. But so I went to Juneteenth.com to get this information for you. So, and it's not gonna be a long part, but you know, let's hear a little bit of it. Dating back to 1865, it was on June 19th that the Union soldiers, led by Major General Gordon Granger, landed at Galveston, Texas, with the news that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. 1865, if we all remember, the Emancipation Proclamation was 1863, January. So 2.5+ years later, in 1865, finally a general came to Galveston, Texas, and told the individuals, can't hear me? Let's see. I'll turn your thing up, Tremaine, because I can hear it on my, sorry people, I'll be trying to pay attention to that. But anyways, I'll turn it up because I can hear it on my chat when I'm on there. So tell me again if you can't hear it. But anyways, so in 1865, 2.5 years later, in Galveston, Texas, enslaved individuals were finally informed that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed over 2.5 years later, and that they actually were free. Mind you, I just had the thought that there was no reparation for those 2.5 years to those individuals either. It wasn't like, you know, oh, we forgot to tell you, let's make sure we pay you for all your time that you spent for the last 2.5 years working for us, building this nation for us, building our nation for us, building our families, let me pay you for all your time. There was none of that, okay? But that's a sidebar that needs to be examined. Anyway, so the Emancipation Proclamation, it had little impact on the Texans due to the minimal number of Union troops who could enforce the new executive order. So the reason why Galveston, Texas, had enslaved, Africans for 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation is because there was not enough individuals to enforce that executive order from the president, right? Let me see. I just want to make sure I can hear myself. Okay, yes, I can. But I'm going on from the Juneteenth.com, information that says, however, with the surrender of General Lee in April of 1865 and the arrival of General Granger's regiment, the forces were finally strong enough to influence and overcome the resistance. Yay, right? Yes. Later attempts to explain this 2.5-year delay in the receipt of this important news have yielded several versions that have been handed down through the years. So later on, after these folks had been released, they said, okay, what took place that you all didn't know that you had been free 2.5 years prior to General Granger coming to see you? And so here are some of the examples or some of the excuses that we're told. It says, often told is one, the story of a messenger who was murdered on his way to Texas with the news of freedom. So one of the excuses that they give is that a messenger was murdered as he was on his way. Another is that the news was deliberately withheld by the enslavers. That's the second one. And the reason for that was to maintain the labor force on the plantations. That's not a surprise, is it? No. And still another reason is that federal troops actually waited for the slave owners to reap the benefits of one last cotton harvest before going to Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm going to say that again because I need you to understand what I said. The last reason that was given here is that federal troops actually waited for the slave owners to reap the benefits from one last harvest before going to Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. I just realized what that said. I had some other thoughts on that. I'm gonna have some other thoughts now. All of which, or none of these versions could be true. Some of them could be true, none of them could be true. They're likely all true. Anyways, certainly for some, President Lincoln's authority over the rebellious states was in question. Whatever the reasons, conditions in Texas remained status quo well beyond the statutory. So well beyond 1863, Black individuals were were still enslaved 2.5 years later, which is when Juneteenth comes. So June 19th, 1865, this proclamation was heard in Galveston, Texas, and the story of June 19th, Juneteenth became a reality. the celebration began. But we're talking Juneteenth and DEI and anti-racism, how they connect and why they connect. So one of the things that when it comes to DEI and anti-racism relates to Juneteenth in this little history that we just read to you, how many people are willing, how many people are speaking up or are willing to speak up? Okay, so we recognize that, when Juneteenth was declared, somebody had to speak up and say, hey, look, Juneteenth is a thing. Did you all know? I'm sorry, the Emancipation Proclamation is a thing, in Galveston, Texas. Somebody needed to speak up and say, we got the newspaper, results, the newspaper article, and we saw that the president, released the slaves, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, and they're free. Who spoke up and said, who didn't speak up and say to the slave owners, these individuals are free? How many people today in your DEI in your organizations, are willing to, or are even able to, but oftentimes who are willing to speak up and say, hey, look, we have a lack of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism in this organization, and we need to talk about that. Well, maybe the reason why they don't speak up like they do is for the first reason that was given as to why possibly Texans in Galveston didn't know, because the messenger could have been killed, right? There's a possibility that people don't speak up because the messenger could have been killed, right? So how many messengers today are being killed? Think about how many individuals in their places of employment, many of us who do DEI and anti-racism work, many of us who do it right, many of us who are authentic to actual diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not a whitewashed version of it, not a performative version of it, oftentimes get killed in the form of losing their jobs. We're lied on, we are ostracized, our character and our influence is as intentionally attempted destruction on. How many times do we in our DEI and anti-racism efforts recognize, acknowledge that the messenger for DEI and anti-racism often suffers greatly, sometimes up to death? We're talking Juneteenth and how Galveston, Texas, Africans, African Americans at that time, enslaved individuals, how didn't they know? And how does that relate to DEI? How are some of the things that occurred at that time still happening today, really? How is it still happening today? Because they might not have known. There's one example that goes around that says that maybe the messenger was killed. How many messengers are we killing that is interrupting our DEI and anti-racism efforts on our job? The other thing that they had said is that maybe with information had been withheld. Okay, we know that Galveston, Texas folks knew, yes, or get whiteballed. I want you to explain that a little bit, Tremaine, but I agree because I already agree. But how often are we withholding information? Back then and even today, Black and brown individuals are often dissuaded from getting information. We got all of these people who are critical race theory detractors, and critical race theory is bad. Those folks, we've got these folks who say you can't have this or that book in school libraries or even prison libraries. We know that during slavery times, for Black and brown individuals to read was a crime. So we legalized against education. We legalize against education today, especially when we're talking about critical race theory, and then and the individuals trying to get us to not allow the critical thought around race related to our history and our present day, which that's all it is. But we legalize against that based on all this mess that they create. How often are we still doing that with our DEI efforts and our anti-racism efforts? How is that looking in your organization? How are you examining your withholding of information? How do your employees, we had a conversation about 3 years ago, I think it was about 3 years ago. It was definitely before the pandemic. A large group of us got together, individuals and leaders in our community, to have a conversation. And one of the things that I highlighted while I was there was that, we have all these programs supposedly for our community that, should be answering all these needs. And oftentimes our employers are not making this information accessible. Not only this information that is supposed to reach the community, it should be accessible to them, but how their individual employees who work for them, how this information could benefit them, they don't make it accessible to them. That's a problem. If we know something that can help someone else, why wouldn't we tell them? Why would we just withhold information? So back in Juneteenth, you know, there was a withholding of information. Today in our DEI and anti-racism efforts, there's withholding of information. There's this thing where we can't talk about that. What do you mean you can't talk about that? What do you mean you can't talk about injustice? What do you mean you can't talk about wrongdoing? What do you mean you can't talk about it? You're withholding information. What do you mean you can't talk about the resources? Why aren't you making them readily available? Why aren't you having classes on these are all the things that are available to you that you can have, and these are all the ways that they can help you? Why are we doing that? Why are we withholding information? And how are we different than the response in Galveston, Texas versus today? How are we different when we're talking about these things? The other thing that happened in Galveston, Texas was give me a second, I gotta go. Okay, so the purpose for withholding all that information was so that they can maintain their labor force on the plantation. It's so much easier for ignorant individuals, meaning you just don't know, individuals who don't know, it's so much easier to pull the wool over their eyes. So we know this everywhere, okay? That's why we say, go get a second opinion when you go into a doctor. Talk to somebody else besides this one person, get enough information, do your own research, talk to people who have the same condition, like get information. We know this when we go to, our mechanics. Oftentimes I'll speak for just Keisha. I like to take a male with me when I go to these mechanics and et cetera, unless I've, developed a relationship as far as, working relationship with some of them. And I do have a mechanic who does very well and seems to be above board with me. But anyways, though, how many times should we take somebody who knows what is going on, who can call bull when someone in front of you is giving you bad information? You know what I mean? But because in your ignorance, you don't know that it's bad information, you can have the wool pulled over your eyes. How often, are we intentionally withholding information so that we can be benefited as organizations, as any kind of organizations, our financial institutions, our educational systems, our government, our cops? How often are these systems withholding information? That's why we say that's why we had this big old push. We want cameras, put cameras on these cops, because we know they're lying, because they are lying oftentimes about what is occurring. And the cameras show that even today you have a camera on, and when we get the video footage, because now the thing is, I didn't have it turned on. That's the intentional. That's why whenever anything's going on and you have the ability to film the cops, period, okay? But anyways, though, we had the whole push out there to say, let's get cameras on these cops so we can have peace of mind to know that you're doing the right thing, because we don't trust you. And then you come back with the video footage that shows you said something totally different than what happened. Think about Ahmaud Arbery. This was just a couple of years ago. You know what I mean? Or even, how can I forget his name? George Floyd. You know what I mean? All these different ways that we try to force those that are in positions of authority, government, military, law enforcement, education, financial institutions, try to force them to be accountable and to have some type of integrity. And oftentimes we're finding that they're withholding information, they're withholding resources, they're withholding connections, they're omitting it, and we suffer. And the purpose of them doing that is to benefit themselves. How is that any different than what the response was in Galveston, Texas? The other thing that they mentioned about Galveston, Texas, was that the federal troops actually waited to officially announce to the slave owners. Now, clearly there was some communication going on between slave owners and federal troops. You know, there was this conversation, I've got to maintain plausible deniability, so I'm not going to make an official announcement until your crops come in, and then I'll come down and make that announcement. Slave owners like, yeah, that's a good, you know, can you wait? Yep, you can wait. Okay, and I'll give you some kickback based on the fact that you're waiting. So, you know, that's how that works out. How often is that occurring today? How many employers, you know, now these are federal troops. These weren't just, you know, Billy Bob Joe on the corner, you know, spitting tobacco, had this major information and said, hey, look, I'm just not going to tell you. No, these are federal troops, individuals who are in positions of authority, individuals who say, because I have reached such a level in my life and in my career, you should trust the things that I say, you should trust my actions and behavior, who are intentionally doing wrong. How many of our federal troops today, federal troops, people in positions of authority, are intentionally doing wrong? They had this attitude that unless you find out about it, I'm not telling it. So then you have people, like some of us we might know, who recognize wrongdoing and say something, you know, and everybody else is looking like, what in the world, you know? But we don't have these organizations, we don't have people in positions of authority who often are honest, you know, are telling the truth simply because it is the truth, who are holding themselves to account. They are, on the contrary, saying, I'm going to support you in your wrong. And yeah, I'll take the kickbacks too. How do you think that might derail your diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism efforts? It does, it derails it. You know, you can't have true diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism in your efforts when you are the person in authority who's willing to do wrong until and if you get caught. So if you don't get caught, you're still going to be doing those wrong. If you don't get caught, you know, you'll still be supporting the wrong of another. This is and one of the things that I wanted to just mention about that, this was happening in Galveston, Texas in 1863. Okay. Now we of a fact know, for a fact know, that in Galveston, Texas was not the only place that federal individuals, people in positions of authority, were cooperating, helping, and you know, forcing wrongdoing, you know, and just getting away with it, you know, saying, hey, look, I know you're doing wrong, I'm doing wrong, we're doing wrong, and we're going to keep doing it, period. And then we're going to lie about what we're doing, you know, if and when we get caught, and you know, and that'll be that, and we won't get punished for it. Okay, this is 1863 that this was occurring. We are in 2022. How often, and you all have your own experiences, I'm sure. I mean, think about George Floyd, you know, thankfully the guy got, the one officer, you know, got convicted, but the lengths that we had to go through to get him convicted. But think about January 6th. How many of those white individuals were convicted to the level that they should have been for insurrection against this nation, against our symbol of democracy? How many of them were convicted? Or even the response in Uvalde, I think I'm pronouncing it right, Uvalde, Texas. How many of those officers are going to lose their job for not doing their job? You sign up for to go into spaces like this, you know, in Uvalde, Texas. You sign up to place yourself in danger, and then you don't place yourself in danger, and what you actually do is arrest parents who are willing to do the job that you're not willing to do after you've been fully trained. How many of them are going to lose their jobs? The point that I'm trying to make with that, this whole thing, 1863 to 2022, you know, us having people in positions of authority willing to do wrongdoing, willing to cover up wrongdoing, willing to lie for wrongdoing. There's a culture that has been developed and cultivated. It's been watered and it's been perfected. It's been crafted, that now it's become the norm. This is dominant culture. This idea that, we don't, unless you catch me, I'm not telling you. And I'm gonna lie, so much so, and I'm gonna tell everybody around me to lie, and I'm gonna say you're the one who's actually wrong. And then because everybody thinks like me, I'm gonna get over on it. I'm gonna get off on it. I'm not gonna be held accountable to it. There's a culture that oftentimes our dominant culture brothers and sisters, white brothers and sisters, do not examine about their culture that makes them hesitant to call out and address wrongdoing. Which is why Juneteenth is now a thing, which is why we actually have to celebrate the release of slavery, of individuals of enslaved African Americans who were released from slavery 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, because of these things that were done. Okay, so I wanted us to talk about those things in relation to DEI and anti-racism. This is a DEI and anti-racism show. We're always trying to have our conversations around that subject matter. We recognize that, until we become aware, it's hard to operate any differently. And so we are constantly trying to make us aware. We also are very committed and to, having these conversations through a historically authentic lens. We are committed to actual diversity here. If you're coming here on the show and your thought processes aren't challenged, then we're not doing our job. And so it's very important to me that you be challenged when you come on this show, and that you consider these everyday occurrences through the lens of DEI and anti-racism, through the actual lens, and that you examine. You got to start examining your thought processes, your responses, your actions or inaction, and then also we're hopeful that you will eventually choose to begin to operate, in a way that allows us to have less racism in the world. So nothing about the conditions that we find ourselves in today as a nation are new. These things were happening not only in 1863, but Juneteenth gives us an opportunity to talk about them. So they were also happening in 1863. They're still happening in 2022. And a lot of it's related to systemic racism that has been, crafted into our policies, crafted into our ideology, which now makes it seem like it's normal and it's okay, and it's not. But that's what it tends to do. Like I said, we're all about trying to challenge you when it comes to DEI and anti-racism, on these conversations at a meeting of diverse minds. And again, Juneteenth has just provided us that opportunity to be able to, raise awareness to the four, at least examples on Juneteenth.com that were given as to why Galveston, Texas, didn't find out for 2.5 years later that they were free. And those, reasons were they killed the messenger. There's a possibility that the messenger who was going to tell Galveston, Texas that, hey, you all are free, was murdered. Consider, are you murdering your messengers on your job? Are you murdering their character? Are you murdering them by taking their job away from them? What are you doing as DEI and anti-racist organizations who say you're supposedly in that space? What are you doing to ensure that actual DEI and anti-racism is being implemented and being infused throughout your organization? Are you murdering the messenger? Are you killing the messenger? Are you withholding, omitting, or hiding and legalizing against information? Are you doing that? Are you saying, you can't know about these things that I have going on, for whatever reasons, or I'm not going to give you the resources and the connections. I won't make those things for you, because I don't want you to have what I have. You've got to examine that within yourself. You got to be honest enough to do that, because that's what happened in Galveston, Texas, as a way to require us to have Juneteenth as a holiday now. Are you doing these things because you want to maintain your status? We know that, specifically our white brothers and sisters, when they think about DEI and anti-racism and when we talk about equity and equality, a lot of times, when and if they're honest, they'll say and a lot of times they're not honest, but when and if, and then sometimes even when they're not, always when they're not, others recognize you're afraid that we're going to be equal. You're afraid that we're going to be equal. And for you, for some reason, that causes fear. I don't understand that. Maybe because I'm not of dominant culture. Maybe that's why I understand it. But the idea that other individuals will have the quality of life that you have, you're afraid for them to have that, because that's what your inaction says, and that's what you say out your mouth, that we hear you say out your mouth, that you don't hear you say out your mouth. But anyways, though, why would that be a problem for you, for other individuals to have a quality of life that's like yours? But and so because of that fear, you will withhold information, resources, connections, power. You'll withhold proper pay. You withhold these things, and it derails your DEI and anti-racism efforts. And then the last one that we talked about was just having an integrity, to doing the right thing, even when other folks aren't looking. Oftentimes we don't have people who are in positions of authority doing the right thing, when others are not looking. There's no integrity in our positions of authority. They're just not. In our positions of government authority. And like I said, these systems that we are governed under, education, the military, our police system, our financial institutions, like every area of our existence, they don't operate through a system of integrity. That's just not how it happens. That's not what we were. That's not how this nation was designed. And that culture of individuals, our white brothers and sisters who came here, they created and crafted that culture, cultivated that culture, babied that culture, really took care of that culture, massaged it and made sure that it grew up. Now it's grown up into this really ugly, sick tree, powerful tree, with all these roots everywhere, where everybody operates through those practices, because, that's in their mind, that's okay. Until and unless they get caught. And even then, they're still going to be lying for each other to try to make sure that they don't get caught. Anyways, though, and then who's evaluating your DEI and anti-racism information? That's the other thing. Oftentimes, if our friends are doing the evaluating, I hear some paper seems like, if our friends who think like us, act like us, behave like us, are doing the evaluating of our practices, then likely they're going to not find anything wrong. If Black folks who are not free, okay, so like I talked about before, in the inclusion example, if you're getting Black and brown individuals to tell you that you're doing a good job, and they're not free, they're going to tell you you're doing a good job. So you'd have to understand what a free Black person actually is. This is a Black person Black or brown person who actually can speak the honest truth to you, who could be authentic with you, who can say, look, no, you're not doing good at all. Not at all. You can actually do a whole lot more. But because they know that if they say that to you, they'll get fired, they'll get blackballed, they'll get, arrested, they won't tell you the truth. They'll just keep on lying to you because that's what you want them to. So they're not free. Okay, so who's evaluating even the responses that you all are having as diverse, equitable, and inclusive, and even anti-racist organizations, when you say that that's who you are? Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us for another meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton. I'm Keisha Hamilton, and we're talking Juneteenth and its relation to DEI and anti-racism. Feel free to put some more comments down if you want to. I'll come back and look at them if there's anything there. But just make sure that you're not responding in a way that requires us to have another Juneteenth, in another so many years. The only reason why we're celebrating Juneteenth right now is because somebody either killed the messenger, withheld, admitted, hid, or legalized against information being shared, simply because they wanted to maintain their labor force, and because they had the support of federal troops and those who are in positions of authority, right? So that's why we have Juneteenth today, because that is what occurred back then. Somebody said, regardless of the fact that the President of the United States, declared Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, we're not going to tell Galveston, Texas until 1865, 2.5 years later. And those individuals who are working all that time, they're going to continue to work. We're not giving them anything when they're set free, regardless of the fact that we knew that they should have been set free. Don't act like that today with your DEI and anti-racism efforts, even though oftentimes we're still doing the exact same thing. Okay, I will talk to you all in a couple weeks. I really appreciate you all joining me for another meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton. I will see you all later. Bye.